Welcome to Italics, television for the Italian-American experience. I'm your host, Anthony Tamburri. In the studio with us this month is Dr. Stefano Albertini, clinical professor of Italian in New York University's Department of Italian and director of its Casa Italiana. Dr. Albertini's area of research and teaching include Nicolò Machiavelli, the 19th century novel, church and state relations, literature and cinema, and contemporary Italian history and politics. This year, the Casa Italiana approaches 30 years of history, and Dr. Albertini celebrates 25 years as its director. Stefano, welcome to Italics.
Thank you very much, Anthony. It's a great
25
pleasure.
years.
Yeah, my silver anniversary.
Exactly.
With NYU and with the Casa.
Yeah. Next year will be 30 years, am I correct?
In 2020.
2020 is 30 years. I remember being at the 20th celebration.
Yes.
And I'm looking forward to the 30th.
And we're still thinking about what we're going to do.
Yeah.
It's not
going to be bittersweet, though.
It is.
Right, because La Baronessa is no longer with us.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you may remember we had a video
Yeah.
featuring her and the history of the Casa, and at the end, with her smile, she said, and I'm expecting all of you in 10 years for our 30th anniversary.
Yeah.
So somehow we owe it to her, this celebration, and we're going to miss her.
Yeah. Among all the sort of personalities that we meet throughout the years and stuff, I think that she just brought something truly genuine to the conversation. And I'm going to say in spite of, and I don't mean it that way, but in spite of, let's say, her social position, in spite of her wealth, and so on and so forth.
She was a very unique person, and as you said, her main feature was the face value of the person was right there.
Yeah.
She never pretended to be anything she was not. She had incredible enthusiasm for culture. She was a history buff. She loved Italy, and she would have liked to share Italian culture with the entire world, and that's why she established the Casa. And on the other hand, I have to say that she had tremendous respect for academic freedom. She's the person that basically made possible the foundation of a Department of Italian that is self-standing, separated from French at NYU. It was one of the conditions she put down in the contract with NYU. And she had the satisfaction and the joy to see that the department had become the biggest department of Italian studies in the United States. And at the same time, she never felt like she was the owner of the Casa or of the department. Mm-hmm. But she knew she was a source of inspiration, and she really was. And I think especially in her way of welcoming people, her desire that all the events would be free and open to the community, that was one of her signatures. Like, I give this gift to NYU, but I give it to the community, so that the doors of this building are open to everybody, and everybody can enjoy some of this culture.
She basically gave a lot of money, and from what I understand, the townhouse was not in the best of conditions.
I saw pictures. I was not here. And the pictures basically was a facade that still stands, and basically nothing behind it. It was a baratro, a cave, a shack.
Yeah.
But the facade was still up, and the facade is beautiful. And as you know, the house is a national monument.
Right.
It was the residence of General Winfield Scott. And if you look at it, the 5 windows, 2 entrance door, and 1 portico for the chariot that is now the office of the administrator. And throughout the years, it was divided into 2 parts. And so what is now Casa Italiana has 3 out of the 5 windows of the original facade. But you really needed to have a vision to see something behind that facade and the empty space. That also gave a great freedom both to the Baroness and to the architects to conceive a space specifically for the function that it had. So for example, the auditorium, obviously you didn't have an auditorium in a townhouse, and she really wanted, because she knew that that would be the beating heart of the Casa, and that's why they decided to raise the level of the garden, so that is at the same level of the ground floor and not at the level of the street, so that to excavate much less in the ground, and that's why we have an auditorium that can sit about 100 people, and that is heavily used every day, morning to night.
And there's a library, the Department of Italian, which didn't exist before.
Exactly. There are all the offices of the faculties in the department. There is a classroom, and there is a library that is also a seminar room, and we also use it for our smaller events that are more academic, more intimate.
It shows what one can do with philanthropy, in the sense that not just give the money and not just put up a building, but she actually changed the existence of the Italian program, right? Because the condition, as you said before, was you can have all of this, but you have to have a Department of Italian, a freestanding Department of Italian. And that's so important because we know from our own experience, right, that Italian is always coupled with something else, and often with French and Italian.
Or Spanish. And
or
they're
Spanish,
both
right.
stronger in
Right.
terms of number than we are, and that we can ever hope to be. So in the case of philanthropy, it's important that cultural philanthropy is done in a smart way. And there is a tradition in this country where you make a donation, especially to academic institutions, but you can establish clauses. That doesn't mean that you will interfere with the academic freedom of that institution. So the Baroness never had anything to say, for example, about which professor should be hired or which course should be taught. But in really giving a direction or redirecting the cultural and academic path of an institution, you can do that. Because you can decide, I'm going to give you this money, provided you satisfy these conditions. And for Italian, it's absolutely indispensable. We cannot rely on the numbers because normally they are against us. And they're not going to go better in terms of number of students majoring in Italian. So if we provide incentives to the academic institutions, and we can make Italian central again. But if we bring in the resources to do it.
We're also playing against a stereotype, unfortunately. I mean, in spite of the fact of Dante, in spite of the fact of Machiavelli, in spite of the fact of Cesare Beccaria, three names, three people who in their own way have had influence well beyond the borders of Italy, and in Dante's case, still 700 and whatever it is, 60, 70 years later, he's still someone we have to deal with, right? In a good sense. In spite of that, Italian always often seems to be sidelined. And it's something it seems we're always up against, or often up against.
Yeah, and of course there is something to say about Italian versus Italian American. This, of course, is at the center of the work you have been doing at the Calandra. Once again, it was one desire of the Baroness, that Italian American culture be included in the scope of Casa Italiana. She had that very clear. And I have to say that unlike many Italians expatriates like her, she made a point of choosing her friends among the Italian American community. And she was very proud and very fond of her Italian American friends. And for many of them, even many of them that are socially established and prominent, it was the first time that they were received in the house of an Italian in New York. So really she changed the way in which the two communities look at each other, and she actually wanted to be one community, and she felt part. Very often she would say she was Italian American, in the sense that she felt very strongly, even if she came to establish a residence in New York quite late in her life, she felt at home here, and she felt at home with her Italian American friends, from whom she learned a lot about the Italian American experience. So for her, the Department of Italian had also to have a special attention to the themes of Italian American identity. And she was very mad, really, because she would be very angry at stereotypes and the stereotyping of the Italian American community. On the other hand, she knew, and we agreed with her, that the only way to overcome the stereotypes is not the fight against the stereotype, is educating
through education
the larger community about the real history, the real facts, the personalities. Don't fight the specific TV show that is insulting to you, even if you understand that it's insulting to you. Tell us more about who your people are and what they did and what they accomplished.
And you guys have the Tiro Assegno chair.
Yes.
You can talk a little bit about
Yes,
that.
absolutely. Tiro Assegno, as you may know, is the most ancient Italian-American club in the States.
Tiro Assegno is shooting gallery.
Exactly, because it was a series of clubs established in Italy throughout the 19th century, basically to form the militia of people that would fight for the unification of the country with Garibaldi and Mazzini and so on. So at the time of the first big wave of migration, some members of these local chapters of the Tiro Assegno ended up in New York, and they wanted to build one chapter of that organization here. People sometimes call it a rifle club, because in the coat of arms there are two rifles, but these were the Risorgimento values, the values of Italian unification, and it was the first time in which Italians took up arms to fight for their own. Instead of fighting for the French or the Spanish or the Austrian, they fought to unify their country. So they were very proud of that. It was, if you want to find an adjective, I would say it was a patriotic organization. So now, of course, things have changed a lot, but they really care about their Italian-American identity. And they decided to make the Baroness an honorary member, and she was the first woman.
Oh, really?
And then she encouraged them to open up to women, because she felt sort of embarrassed to be the only woman in a club that was for gentlemen only. And then from that dialogue started at that time, through their generosity, the generosity of their foundation, we were able to establish these visiting professorship in Italian American Studies. And we feel very strongly about the fact that we have it inside the Department of Italian. And that the visiting fellow that comes, that is every other year, has an office with the Faculty of Italian, participates in our meetings, and really the courses are part of our curriculum, are totally integrated. And then we have Professor Josephine Hendon, that whenever the fellow is not on campus, she teaches a course on Italian-American identity in literature. So basically, there are many stronger programs in Italian-American studies, but we are very proud of the fact that it's part of Italian studies. Otherwise, other people are going to appropriate it, like American studies. And it would be perfectly legitimate.
Perfect, right.
From any point of view.
Right.
But I think for us, it's important to claim that part of our identity.
What's also important is that it is in two departments, because the Tito Segno chair is in the Italian department. Josephine Hendon is a professor of English.
Yes.
And she's actually a novelist in her own right. Right. And a lot of us feel that Italian American Studies perhaps should have two homes. It should be both American Studies and also Italian Studies. And so at NYU, there it is.
Every other year, there is a visiting professor hired through the donation that the Tito Segno Foundation established. And whenever the fellow is not there, Professor Hendon teaches her course.
I came to New York about 12 years ago, and I remember you guys were doing a lot. But it seems to me that in these 12 years, you've really ramped up the activity there, and you're doing so much more. And I say that because for not the first time, you nicely welcomed me with one of my books, and we did that recently. And I remember when I looked at the calendar, I just thought, wow, there's like something every day this month.
Yeah, and we recently also started having 2 or 3 events at the same time. One in the library, one in the auditorium, sometimes one that we sponsor or organize in another venue. It's a bit crazy, and one of the suggestions that we received from the small subcommittee that we established to decide our future, given also the fact that the Baroness further contributes to the endowment after her death in her will. So we have resources, and I didn't want to be the only one deciding how to invest and to spend these resources. So that's why a small part of our advisory board convened to give us indications that I solicited on terms of the direction in which we should go. And almost unanimously they said, you should do a few more events. And I totally agree. The only problem is that very often it is difficult to say no, because we have our own programs that we conceive, and maybe according to a theme or series that we establish, and then we receive a lot of proposals, and many of them are extremely interesting. Right. Not to mention the fact that, as you mentioned, the Italian department is housed inside, so there is a synergy with them, and my colleagues in the department themselves come with ideas and proposals, and they invite guests. So it's a very busy, lively place to be. Never a dull moment.
So what have been some of the challenges that you found 25 years in the seat?
The challenge for somebody organizing a cultural program is basically to create an audience for each of the areas that you establish. But I love that challenge, I have to say. So we are continuing to, of course, to work on the major areas of interest that in Italian studies are literature, music, theater, cinema, visual arts. But the new challenges that we are giving to ourselves are to get out of our comfort zone of the things for which Italy is more renowned. And so areas, for example, like politics and economics, that we have done something, but not really taken as a whole and going into a deep analysis of issues related to it. The other thing is the entire STEM area. We have presented some cases of Italian contributions to the contemporary development of technology and so on, but definitely not enough. And the problem in this case is not creating the programs, is creating an audience that is able to appreciate what you're doing and that follows what you're doing in a venue that they do not necessarily associate with these other disciplines. So these are my new challenges.
And you've had some well-known people walk through the doors of the Casa Italiana. You know, I'm thinking of some of the political figures. The last two presidents, at least of Italy, have visited the Casa Italiana, some of the previous prime ministers, and also some cultural figures, such as Saviano, for example.
Yeah.
Who also taught for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
In secret.
Yeah.
It was the first time, actually, that he was able to go abroad for an extended period of time. Maybe for our audience, Roberto Saviano is an Italian author, writer, journalist who became very famous at a very young age with a book called Gomorra that was also turned into a film and later into a TV series. And in which he basically, in a sort of fictional kind of writing, talked about very real and very present dynamics, especially in the area around Naples connected to the Camorra, organized crime, unveiling some of the structures, precisely how it works, the connection with high fashion and the border between the legal and the illegal being very thin. So for all these reasons and for naming names, Saviano was under, and still is, under heavy police protection. He basically has spent all his youth living in police stations, changing constantly. He couldn't appear in public if his name was announced, so he could do surprise appearances. But so he came and he was with us for a semester. We spoke to the students very frankly. I went the first day he was there, and I told them, you know, your safety and his are in your hands, and you have the fortune of having a protagonist of Italian cultural, political, and social life teaching to you, and it's a unique fortune. He taught a course on the different representations of organized crimes in literature, popular music, cinema, television, and so on. So very interesting course on the media representation of organized crimes, the glamorization of the phenomenon. And, you know, the idea is no Facebook, no Twitter, no Instagram, no nothing. And they were very good because nobody found out about the presence of Roberto de Casa for an entire semester. And then when we finally were able to offer a public event, that was a huge event, the courses were over. So his safety was preserved, and so one of the students.
Yeah. One of the topics that I know you've approached, and it was actually the subject of my last study, is the idea of those who write in Italian outside of Italy, and not just the people I covered, because the people I covered are all Italian-born and educated in Italy, and that's their native language, their first language. But you've also dealt with one or two people whose native language is not Italian.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
We feel very strongly about that, and when I say we, I mean the Casa and the Department of Italian Studies. People are used to think that Italian literature, Italian culture is one solid block. Also because it's not that big in terms of the geographic extension of the country and the relevance in the great scheme of things. It's a very diverse, very fragmented, very different reality. And when it comes to literature especially, you know it better than everybody else, it's a language that became a spoken language very recently, probably around the 50s and 60s with television and radio. And before it was only a literary language. So for many of the Italian authors, the best known Italian authors, Italian was a second language. It was not their native language. It was not the language their mother spoke to them. People like Manzoni or Svevo, they did not speak Italian as first language. For Manzoni, it was the Milanese dialect and French, and then Italian was third. And Svevo, it was German and other languages, and then Italian is something that he learned. So it's not unusual in Italian literature to have writers, very important writers, even the writers in the canon, that were not native speakers, to say it. So we had the fortune of having, for example, Amara Lacouste. He's Algerian-born, fluent in Berber, Arabic, French. And that he decided.
Italian and English.
And then he decided that he wanted to be in Italy and to learn. And I'm fascinated by the fact that the love story of Amara with Italian culture begins with Commedia all'Italiana, comedy Italian style. He went to see this series at the Italian Culture Institute there, and he decided that he wanted to understand what people like Tognazzi and Totò were saying without reading the subtitles, and that's where he starts. And basically, he became an Italian writer.
And a satirical writer, Commedia all'Italiana.
Absolutely, and these are all these elements, you can see it. And a few years ago, for example, when we had our literary prize, the Zerini Marimo Prize, one of the winners was Elena Janecek. And the name, you understand, is not Italian. She's a Polish-Jewish a woman who was born in Germany. Her native language is German. She published a book of poetry in German, and then she moved to Italy. And she started writing in Italian. Last year, she won the Premio Strega.
Premio Strega last
It is
year,
the
right,
most
exactly.
prestigious literary prize in Italy. And once again, it went to somebody who is not a native speaker of Italian. We find all these phenomena, literary phenomena, not random. And we like to connect them and to pair them with the authors that you studied that are Italian, that are living somewhere else, and that have absorbed another culture. And for each of your authors, there is a different story, because for some of them it was a necessity, for some of them it was a choice, for some of them it's a stable choice, for some of them it's a coming and going. And I think we can only earn culturally from understanding these differences and understanding that, again, Italian is not a solid block, but think of it as a beautifully shaped diamond with many faces, and each of them shines in a different way.
And you have two of these writers are on the faculty.
Yes.
One's in the Tisch School and one's in the Italian department.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Antonio Monde in the Tisch School and Amara in...
And I was delighted to see the Casa doing that for all the reasons you just said, because we really have to think in different terms of that adjective Italian, right? And that it goes beyond those borders that we know as the peninsula and the two big islands, right? But that there's Italian going on in other parts of the world. And we at the Calandra Institute have been involved in this 3 series of conferences on 3 different continents, the last one being in Genova. And well after this program airs, we'll be making plans to go to Buenos Aires. So I'm sort of giving a little bit of a...
Wonderful.
Yeah, and so we're hopeful that that'll take place in August of 2020. So maybe we're going to have to involve the Casa Italiana.
I'd love to.
Yeah.
Anytime. It's one, each of us has a city of his or her desires, and Buenos Aires is mine.
Aires is a great city. It is. Yeah.
With a great concentration of bookstores, right?
Oh, it's amazing. The Avenida, what is it? De los Corrientes.
Yes, the highest percentage of psychoanalysts in the world, right? The highest concentration.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful city. So it'll be really great to go back. We, of course, in North America, always think of North America, the United States. And it is true that during the massive immigration, the historical immigration of 1880, 1920s, the largest number came to the United States, 4.2 million or whatever it was in that period. But Argentina, Latin America in general, and Argentina specifically.
And if the Italian diaspora is often forgotten by Italian official culture, as you know very well, and I always quote you for no, it's very important. You know that there are between 1880 and 1920s like 9 to 10 million Italians that moved from a country of about 30.
Right.
In the history book on which I studied, there were 3 lines about it.
Yeah.
It's like a movement of biblical dimensions.
Right.
And it's not talked about. It's like a sort of the shameful history of a family you don't want to discuss. But if the immigration to the United States on some level has now found the stage and the spotlight because of many reasons. If you wish, because of the success of the Italian-American community here, politically, on the artistic scene, literary, cinema, and so on. The ones in other countries didn't. And for example, we had a roundtable on Lucio Fontana. The Matt Breuer dedicated an exhibit to him this last fall. Lucio Fontana was born in Argentina. Then as a young boy came to Italy, and then he went back to Argentina. If you look at the critical edition of the works of Lucio Fontana, made by an Italian art historian, his Argentinian side is completely neglected. It's not mentioned. So that many people, even that are very familiar with the art of Lucio Fontana, knew absolutely nothing about the fact that he was an immigrant himself that went back to Argentina. His father had a sort of funeral monument little studio. So he learned the trade of sculpting in Argentina from his father, but in an Argentinian context. Yeah. And then he went back and he worked with the avant-garde of this. So all that chapter in the life of Fontana, completely unknown. And it was only because here at Matt Breuer, the curator of the exhibit is the curator of Spanish and Latin American art, that finally a spotlight was put on that aspect of Fontana. But talking about neglecting and black spots in Italian history related to the diaspora, I thought that was a very, very emblematic case.
The Italians not speaking about that part the history of Italy, the emigratory part of Italy, is sort of like us speaking about this, Americans speaking about the Civil War as a little skirmish between a couple of states.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But, you know, I mean, it's not that, right? And the same thing here. And the other thing is we come to understand a little bit better what's going on in Italy. Like we can have a sense of empathy, let's say, to quote an Italian-American judge when he spoke about what it means for him to be Italian. And if we know what happened then, we can perhaps look at what's happening now with a little bit different eyes. The same thing here in the United States when the administration at the very beginning did the Muslim ban, whatever. Some of us, you know, wrote what we wrote about our own histories and our own grandparents and things of that sort.
And I think, you know, that part of the anti-immigration feelings that you have now in Italy and the fact that you have right now in government a xenophobic, racist party like the League has to do with the fact that our own immigration history is unknown.
Exactly.
And the few times that it's mentioned, it's always mentioned with a caveat, but we were not like them. We were different.
Right.
No, we were desperate.
We were the same thing.
Many of us were so poor that didn't know what to eat. Very much like these people. And some of them were criminals, yes, because they had to recur to any kind of source to feed their families. And some of them were perfectly fine, hardworking people, like the ones that come to our shores now.
Yeah.
But our refusal, and I'm talking now as Italian, the refusal to acknowledge our migratory past, our past as migrants, as people that had to leave their own land, leads to the anti-immigration and xenophobic feelings that we have now in the country.
Listen, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule because you have programs every day.
But I love being here with you.
And we'll get back to doing something on migration between the two institutions because we've already collaborated well and it's been a wonderful joy to do so. And our work is still not done.
Not at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for watching this episode of Italics. I'm Anthony Tamburri. Arrivederci alla prossima puntata.